It's pretty awesome. But no, I don't know. I'd say it's Steve Buscemi's best role as Nikita Khrushchev.
The Death of Stalin. Gosh, I'm so behind.
The whole thing's pretty much about Lavrenti Beria.
The head of the was it the KGB or
NKVD.
just a secret? Killed all the people.
Yeah.
Okay, well, so thanks to Terry Pinkard, we got this great title, The Sociality of Reason. So if I'm trying to explain Hegel's solution to the problem of knowledge, it's basically sociology. So now, but how does this work? Well, what does a sociologist do? Haven't I talked about this? A sociologist's job is to study groups, right? Psychologists study individuals, sociologists study groups, basically. And in studying the groups, they might say, okay, so how many religions do we have in the United States? How religious are Americans? And so they'll send graduate students all over interviewing people and stuff, and publish Religions in America, as their book, and teach courses on it and everything. And they'll say, okay, so you've got these snake charmers, these, fundamentalists, these Lutherans, these Episcopalians, you've got all these, and these folks all believe all this, and that. But if you then go to the sociologist who's now done this study, and you say, okay, so does God exist? And they're like, huh? These people believe, Americans believe God exists. So do you think he exists? And they're like, what? That's not my job. My job is to tell you what these people believe, right? And they can say with a certain level of certainty based on the polls that they take that this is a pretty accurate description of the way the groups of people in a certain place believe. The polls, who's going to vote? Look how close the polls get. You might still laugh because, well, we thought Hillary was going to win, and no, that was wrong, wasn't it? But they were actually pretty darn close. Actually, the polls, they were within 5% or so in their estimates. Depending. We have polls that's pretty much determining even the way things are moving here. I mean, Walker left the race because his polls were low, right? Mm-hmm. So that pretty much, he says, well, if we want the best for Alaska, then I'll drop out and let Begich, who had higher polls.
Well, that ballot screwed up bad, so that's why.
And that too, yeah, that clearly had a severe impact on it.
3 weeks before the elections.
Yeah. But so polls are definitely, give or take, about as accurate as our weather, right? And so, that's still funny, but actually the weather people are pretty darn accurate, to why we're having the warm rains that we have because of the blob in the Pacific, and the last time we had that, et cetera, et cetera. So they have all sorts of devices watching this whole thing. But this is a dialectical process. So that's the way knowledge is at least considered today, that it's a matter of you're never going to know absolutely what is the case. Knowledge is social, in a sense. What do people believe? So the sociologist isn't going to come out and say what they then conclude. They haven't learned that God exists or not. What they've learned is what people think in groups, right? So that's knowledge today. What people think is the case, right? To some extent, you can verify it with how reality pushes back on the so-called socially constructed reality, right? But an awful lot of our reality is clearly socially constructed, which is a Hegelian concept. Peter Berger, who's the one that came up with the social construction of reality, along with his co-author. I'd mentioned this. Right? This is a Hegelian perspective. In fact, it really helped me reading this while I was also studying Hegel to get a sense of what the heck Hegel was talking about. This is like the modern way of understanding what Hegel's doing. And so we are born into a reality that's constructed by our society, that's explained to us through our language and other things like our gestures. That's kind of fascinating when you watch people speaking Spanish, they gesture a certain way, and when they speak English, the same people gesture a different way, and you could tell which is English and which is Spanish if you're aware, right? Because you could tell by their gestures which language they're speaking, even if you can't hear it, which is pretty cool, right? So we're, so our it's not just our language; it's a whole set of cultural characteristics, the way we look, the way we dress, the way we walk.
Which side of the road you drive on.
Yeah.
What your roads are made out of.
Yeah, yeah. So there's a world out there that's socially constructed, and we grow into that, and that structures us. As Berger talks about it, as we create these concepts like money and iPads and things of that sort, they become objectified, which, kind of like concrete. It starts off as an idea, but it becomes an actual artifact that you can't get rid of until the next iPad comes out, right? And if you think of it, but that structures you, but then you're the one that comes up with the new ideas for the new devices so that gets replaced. So there is a dialectical process between how society structures us, and then we in turn structure society. So it's a dialectical process. And knowledge is that way. And by the way, even though I don't have them in the syllabus, one of the ones that really turned this socially constructed aspect onto science itself was the nature of scientific revolution. So this is Thomas Kuhn, who's dead now, I believe. I don't know. Is he dead? Maybe he's still out there because he wrote. Yeah. Okay. So he died in '96.
22 years ago.
So he's where we get the paradigm shift, is where
Wasn't that long ago for me.
For me.
However, we think of I think we grow up, or at least I remember growing up thinking that science is like finding the truth. As a funeral by funeral, science moves on, right? Because it's basically the idea is it has a theory. Heat, flows. It's phlogiston, that causes heat. Oh no, it's not. So that theory goes away. So there's a funeral for that theory, and you get a new theory that's better, and then you get a new theory that's better, and a new theory that's better, a new theory that's better, etc. Right? So funeral by funeral. That's even what's the rest of that expression? Science advances one funeral at a time. I'm close, right? So, meaning that not people die and then, no, but the theory dies. And so there's a funeral for the theory. It moves on, right? So you think, well, so we're getting closer and closer to actually understanding how reality works. And that's certainly fine, but keep in mind, as Kuhn points out in the structure of scientific revolutions, that science progresses in social ways. So there's revolutions, there's individuals that they grow up, they're attached to the current theories, they're in the hierarchy, they're committed to making sure that those theories are continued to be
They're at the top of their various departments.
They're part of that hierarchy. Yeah, and if you don't learn those, then you're not part of it. You don't get your PhD.
People that they've staffed
you don't
their
get
university departments with.
They hire and fire.
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
So, but meanwhile, of course, their theories don't explain everything. So there are individuals that are upset because they're brilliant, but they can't get in because they don't know people. They're not networked with the people that are in the hierarchy. They're not the sons of the faculty. They're brilliant young men that ought to be, or young women even. Usually, of course, that could be a hierarchy problem too, right? But you end up then finally with these people out on the periphery of things coming up with a new, completely radical solution. So remember, Einstein was a patent clerk.
Mm-hmm.
You couldn't get in. And he's a patent clerk, and he writes these papers, and one physicist looks at it and says, damn, this is good. And it gets published, and then they start testing it, and lo and behold, wow, now he's famous, and there's a paradigm shift to, and so the old guard basically dies out or gets fired or replaced by the new guys. So it's a very social kind of movement.
It's kind of like a coup.
Yeah. How much of the progress that science makes is us actually moving further and further along and discovering the nature of the universe? Well, to some extent it must be. We get newer and newer devices, we have new technologies. On the other hand, it still seems like there's a social construction aspect to it. So even when we get to the kind of knowledge that you feel like this is the way nature really is somewhere out in that Kantian in itself, or rather the Kantian Ding an sich, right? The way it really is, right? It's much muddier than that. There's still kind of a sense that the reason that particles act the way they do is because of our method of observing them, right? Right? That's almost like the socially constructed reality. If we put the filter there and we look for particles hitting the wall through the slots, they act like regular particles. If we take the filter away, it spreads out like a wave. So it seems like the way we observe things creates the reality that's out there for us, even in something like those very basic experiments, right? And we end up with a compromise calling it a wavicle, which is hilarious, right? So yes, you're familiar with this, right?
Mm-hmm.
Wavicles? That's no?
No.
So
Well, at the very bottom, aren't the quarks just spin without anything to spin?
is it wavicle? Wavicles.
That sounds like a miracle.
They're pretty cool.
What is? Imaginification
I know, I like that
whole
word.
sentence just sounds.
of quantum photonic wavicles.
I like it.
Well, everything's made up of particles. Oh, this is just an artsy craftsy thing. I want experiment, maybe. Will help. I remember when this came out. It was not that long ago.
I think they just came out with a new camera that can take pictures so fast they could take pictures of just light.
I guess both characteristics at the same time. Oh, okay, so here's the original.
If you spit blood when you brush or floss, you may have gum problems and could be on the journey to much worse. Try Parodontax toothpaste, the toothpaste that helps prevent bleeding gums.
Thanks.
Leave bleeding gums behind with Parodontax.
Thanks.
What is light?
What is light? What is light? That's a good question, isn't it? What is light?
Isn't it an element?
It was a wave. And this debate raged on until it was settled by the experiment I've recreated today. Thomas Young's double-slit experiment. To make sure I got the experiment right, I went to the original source. With the help of Brady Heron, I managed to get into the vault underneath the Royal Society in London. There I found Thomas Young's handwritten notes from 1803.
I brought into the sunbeam a slip of a card, about 1/30th of an inch in breadth, and observed its shadow, either on the wall or on other cards held at different distances, besides the fringes of colors on each side of the shadow itself was divided by similar parallel fringes of smaller dimensions. Wow.
This is an experiment so simple that you could make it at home, and yet so...
Well, I've got it. I don't want to lose total track of what we're actually supposed to be talking about. But so, just basically our contemporary post-Hegelian point of view on the nature of knowledge is that it's pragmatic, dialectical. While there are certain things that we feel we absolutely know, math is one of the main things, nonetheless we consider math socially constructed. So we create these symbolic systems. And the reason we have such confidence in them is because everybody accepts it. So you're not allowed to argue about 5 + 5 = 10, right? Or mom will smack you, right? So the reason certain knowledge seems much more certain is because of the lack of argument over those principles, right? But in any of those systems, there have to be axioms that we have to believe. That's what it means to be an axiom. It's undoubtable, right? But those axioms cannot be demonstrated as true in the system. But without believing that those axioms are true, you can't play the game. You're out of the, you can't play the football game. You can't believe that Harry Potter's a wizard. You can't believe that 2 + 2 is always 4, etc. Right? So that's knowledge, basically, and that's Hegel. But following that, we of course get into all sorts of issues. Many historical issues like the nature of the soul, the nature of the self. David Hume already kind of pointed out that if, by definition, the only thing we know for sure, for Hume, is what we're perceiving at the moment, then strictly speaking, we have no grounds for saying that there's a persistent self. Well, we still kind of have to deal with that as an issue. So what is the self? And the self is, today, we would say a set of procedures or processes that are part of our knowledge base that we learn so that basically the kind of self you are is based on the kind of culture you're in. So there's different kinds of selves out there. Well, for the Romantic period, which we put both Kierkegaard and Nietzsche absolutely in, you've got the recognition that our social selves are embedded in a story about who we are. So these processes that I imbibe, that I learn, include me learning my roles. What are my roles? And my roles are always roles embedded in a narrative, a story. Right? Who am I? As Peter Berger says, the three main questions that your philosophy, your sociology, whatever, has to explain for you, your world has to explain for you, is who are you in the full picture, right? What is your place in the universe? What are your roles? How do you act? And how do you maintain that place, right? So this is all good acting. What plays am I in? What roles do I have in that play? And how do I perform this particular role so that everybody appreciates my character and keeps hiring me for the play, right? So that's another way. That's the way we would think of the self in our society, right? That focuses on my identity, my conception of myself, and that seems to have been invented right around then. It's kind of interesting. This Sunday at the fellowship, where I go, the presenter talked about loneliness, and check the, if I don't know if you're aware of the Ngram Viewer. This is a tool on Google called Ngram Viewer. You just type that in, you saw, and you can go to it, and it's neat because you can plug in any word or set of words separated by a comma, or phrases, etc. It explains how you can do these things, and it instantly searches all of the documents on Google for the time period you set. So this is, I don't know why I set for 1800 to 2000. You could change that. And it shows the instances of the word in all those texts, right? So you can do word comparisons, right? So what the presenter pointed out was that loneliness seems to have originated around here. It doesn't really go back much further. It seems like it suddenly arrives, right? Loneliness.
Peaked in the 80s.
And you can see it keeps going. By the way, for sense of perspective, notice this is the percent of occurrence. Notice it's .000600%. So it's not really significant, really. And yet she acted as if it were. Notice if I add something like the word feminism. Did I spell it wrong? Sorry.
Feminism.
Feminine is there. So now you can see I'm comparing two words occurrences, right? And when she was giving the presentation, I said, gosh, this seems very close to feminism. Everybody laughed as if I were blaming feminism for loneliness. And I don't think I was, but it was interpreted as a joke, and I'm not allowed back. No, I'm kidding. That was. But you could see, no, they actually have no concurrent overlap, no significant, concurrent overlap at all. So, no, it wouldn't be. But we might think in terms of Francis Fukuyama's book on identity, point out that actually both loneliness and the feminist aspirations for equal recognition. Recognition is an important Hegelian concept that in our social dialectic with one another, we seek recognition. Now, that's actually more important to us than food and water, to some extent. You know, we'll put up with being hungry, but boy, you recognize me, right? You know, recognize me as a fellow human, et cetera. 5,000 of us marching through Mexico. You recognize us when we get there, We have a universal right to migrate.
Pretty much.
That's, so you could recognize, Fukuyama identifies this as all identity politics. Low priced. The demand for dignity and the politics of.
Looks like he used the same jacket designing as Piketty.
Man, did he?
I don't know. It's exactly the same.
It does seem like, wow. I haven't checked it. I'll have to check it. Well, that was a bestseller.
Right.
Must be something.
Right. Oh, this is new.
Yeah, I just bought this really a couple of weeks ago, but it's been fascinating. The easiest read of his ever, and he's clearly talking to a different audience, and in fact, a lot of the points he makes seem to have come from some of his previous books. He starts off by pointing out that he wouldn't have written this book had it not been the case that President Trump was elected in November. So basically it was the horror of who got elected and his need to explain, at least to himself, why this happened. And he's identified it as identity politics, and that the folks that elected him felt like they were being dissed by society because everybody else was getting special concern, the gays, the trans, all these folks are getting migrants, non-whites, Steven Pinker in his book Enlightenment Now even says in the one chapter that even though a lot of Americans lost their jobs because the industries moved to other countries where the labor was cheaper, those people in those countries gained so much that it was actually worth it. He says that. Can you imagine?
Steven Pinker says that?
Yes.
No, I know. Yeah.
So, he's a Harvard professor. He could say stuff like that. Number one, because he knows none of the folks that he's dissing
Are going
are going to even read it, right?
Yeah.
And so they don't realize they've been dissed by him, although they might feel a general tendency of academics ignoring their plight, which is actually the Democrats have actually ignored their plight, which is why they've shifted to Republicans.
Well, that's sort of, the Democrats are the, international party. They have partnerships with other political parties in other countries, and they organize and coordinate their moves.
It's more of an international.
But the Republicans have their international
Republicans are more
allies
national.
too.
So we end up. This is so. If we go to
Right.
I have to remember to do the folks we're supposed to here. Danish, follower of Hegel, studied Hegel in his university in Copenhagen, but then goes on to graduate school at Berlin. And by the way, in the same class with Karl Marx, sitting in roughly 200 students, I would guess, in a lecture hall, listening to Schelling explaining Hegelianism. And that's kind of significant in my way of viewing this, because if you recall, Schelling was one of Hegel's roommates in Tübingen, along with Hölderlin, the three of them. It's kind of like Seamus, Ron, and Harry, you know. I don't know. Tübingen. In any case, so they, of course, had this long-term relationship, and it wasn't always good, because Hegel, at a certain point where he writes the Phenomenology, explains that Schelling's philosophy is a precursor to his own, which of course totally pisses off Schelling. And so once Hegel dies of stomach ulcers from drinking too much coffee while writing philosophy books, some think it was the plague, but Terry Pinkard argues in his book on Hegel that it was ulcers.
Can you get ulcers from drinking too much coffee?
No.
You want to finish that coffee right there?
Ulcers are caused by bacteria.
Actually, now we know it's a
actually.
bacteria,
Yeah.
but at the time they thought it was acidic stresses on the stomach.
They only found it out like 10 years ago, I think.
It was longer than that. It was longer than that. It was longer than that. But yeah, it was still recent. The Australian doctor did,
Yeah.
and nobody believed him for the longest while.
Really?
You know,
No, it's coffee.
Well, they said you should drink milk, which is really dumb if you think of it, because milk is actually acidic.
Mm-hmm.
They thought somehow like milk is like calming on the stomach. They recommended milk, and Phillips' milk of magnesia, etc. One of the most awful
Funny
tasting
story
stuff.
about that Phillips milk and magnesia is if you're working on a turbine engine, you have this heat sensor that goes inside of the plenum and pulls it in, and the stuff that they want you to buy costs like $700 for a little bottle, but it's amazing that if you get a milk and magnesia bottle and you get that bottle of goop that they want you to put on it to lubricate that, they're exactly the same. So guess what the Air Force did? They bought milk and magnesia downtown and scooped that up here and screwed it in.
It saved us a fortune.
Yeah.
Of course, they might point out, you know, that you're risking $1 million plane with, you know.
Exact same ingredients.
Okay, so Kierkegaard and Marx in the same class, and both of them rebel against Hegel. And Kierkegaard rebels by saying that Hegel's wrong in thinking that society has such a tremendous impact on myself. Instead, he argued that I'm much more free. I'm a freer agent, right? You know, to choose for myself. Right? Marx rebels against it by saying that Hegel's wrong for thinking that we have as much freedom as we have. So that's kind of weird. I mean, you can actually, I'm sure, read the notes that students took in the class and try to figure out how did Schelling influence these people and their understanding of Hegel. By the way, I would argue that American pragmatists are the clear successors to Hegelianism than Europeans, actually. Although, well, it's kind of interesting because Americans have always thought of the most important book that Hegel wrote as the Phenomenology of mind or spirit, whereas the Europeans traditionally thought of the Logic as the more important book, which he wrote later and emphasized system more than this kind of dynamic interplay of forces that you get in, you know, the dialectic in the phenomenology. In any case, so Kierkegaard's focus is on the self, and by the way, some other biographical elements that I think come into play here. Kierkegaard seems to have had bipolar disorder, which got worse as he got older, as it tends to do. In fact, a lot of these things are things that psychologists figure out retrospectively.
Well, they think like Jeremy Bentham had like Asperger's or something.
I'll just quick throw this up there, just so you're familiar with that. So
I
Kay Redfield.
discovered that I had bipolar illness in different ways at different times. When I was 17 years old and a senior in high school, I first got manic, a bit high, and then I got profoundly and suicidally depressed, and I'd never experienced anything like that in my life before. I'd always been very enthusiastic and full of energy, and that lasted about 4 or 5 months, and then I got better, and then I was up and down, and then when I finished my degree, I became an assistant professor at UCLA, and I went psychotically manic, and that was the first time I saw a doctor, and it was the first time I was diagnosed. So in that sense, that was kind of when I first formally knew, but when I was 17, I obviously knew that something was seriously wrong. I just didn't know what it was or what to call it. I was first told that I had manic depressive illness, as it was called then, when I was in my mid-20s.
So that's Kay. And in this book, she talks about significant individuals that retrospectively she diagnoses as a psychiatrist as individuals that seem to have had bipolar illness as well. And Kierkegaard, William James, there's some others that of course are pretty interesting. But so Kierkegaard strikes me as significant. And he does go through these extremes. He writes like crazy, and everybody loves his work. He's at parties, and he's the hit of the party. Then he goes home, and in his journal he writes that he wants to kill himself. Pull the pistol out of the drawer and shoot himself. So extreme, and biographically it's kind of fascinating. By the way, it's depressing, for one thing, to be Danish, even though officially I think the Danes are like the happiest people on earth. Next to, there's a community down in Southeast Asia that also, by law, requires people to be happy in that country.
That's the way to do it.
That's kind of fascinating.
That's how they get it done.
Right? And by the way, it would be tough for me because I don't think they even have the internet. It's like, whoa,
Maybe that's
be
it.
happy without the internet.
It's fully ignorant.
Well, maybe if just someone else tells you how you're feeling all the time.
Yeah, you're happy. Make sure you know that. Okay.
The tourists are coming, be happy.
They don't have that many tourists either, as far as I know. In any case, the Danes, though, they live in a place that looks less interesting than this.
Yeah, it's flat.
Yeah, and a lot of kind of just boringness there. The closest I was ever to Denmark was Bremerhaven. And
The
that was
architecture's pretty and colorful. Actually, really colorful.
where?
I said the architecture's colorful, like Copenhagen.
Oh.
So they kind of make up for the grayness.
Although kind of traveling around with my Oculus Rift, I'm actually not that impressed.
Really?
Going into like Elsinore Castle, where Hamlet takes place. It's really there, and it's like not gonna. I've seen enough. I don't have to go. I can see why Ophelia would be like bored to death and jump out the window. That's okay. But so that's one thing. It kind of reminds me of New Jersey, to some extent. Or if you've driven up to Fairbanks, once you get past Denali and you're like, there's like miles and miles of just really miserable forests. Miserable in the sense that the trees are, Alaska trees have a hard time.
Yeah.
his name, Kierk, means church, and Gard means yard. So Kierkegaard means churchyard, which, by the way, is cemetery. So his family name is Cemetery. And the reason for it was the family couldn't afford, well, or whatever, they ended up with a house in what was the cemetery. Which reminds me of a really bad Stephen King novel, where they discover all the corpses in the basement or something. You know, it's kind of scary. Plus, Dad was absolutely convinced, Kierkegaard's dad was absolutely convinced that he was cursed by God, and lots of people try to figure out exactly what made him feel that way. There's some reasons for it. In any case, he believed that God cursed his family because of what he had done, and so all of his children were going to die young, and they did. It's kind of interesting. I mean, in their 40s. That's still pretty young. In any case, lots of reasons to be depressed. Plus, they were Lutheran, which of all the Christian religions are traditionally viewed to be the kind of among the most depressing. And not just because of their diet. I mean, I love Lake Wobegon. It's absolutely hilarious. But a lot of what makes it hilarious is the treatment that the Lutherans get in Lake Wobegon.
Oh, is that
The Lutherans.
right?
Lake Wobegon.
Well, who does all that?
Garrison
Keeler, right?
Yeah. So, he really knows that he grew up there.
Right, yeah.
Right.
It's like
You know,
their hometown hero, right?
So, yeah, so, and by the way, he's in trouble too.
I know,
Yeah, he's another one of those males
He's
that.
a Me Too guy.
Yeah.
Him too.
You know what?
Yeah.
Mama told him growing up, keep your zipper up, and didn't listen.
Garrison Keeler, man. I don't know though, if you've read his
I don't
books
think
though.
Byron lowered his zipper. I think he just said something, and that's.
If you read his books though, like Garrison Keeler, I don't know, I could see where it came from. Like maybe,
In any case, so depression seems to be like de rigueur for Kierkegaard and his milieu. But he's also very self-centered and realizes, thanks to Hegel, that all the narratives that have traditionally explained my roles, to satisfy those three questions: who am I, what's my place in the cosmos, how do I maintain that place? All those traditional narratives, primarily Christianity, is man-made and questionable. It doesn't actually persuade him to believe that it's true. And so he ends up with this problem, the existential problem, that we exist, I'm here, and I have to create myself. Which, by the way, is precisely what Nietzsche is trying to do also. So let me throw Nietzsche up here. Easy to find Nietzsche. Lots of resources on both of these guys, by the way. More on Nietzsche than on Kierkegaard. Both as writers have lots of fans. In fact, I remember years ago teaching, and I had one student I remember especially who showered, was healthy looking, took care of himself, was active, dynamic in class. And we got up to Kierkegaard, and he was absolutely thrilled. And a couple of years later, I saw him with trench coat, deep set, sunken eyes, pale, walking around like in a daze on campus. And I saw him, and I said to him, "Are you still reading Kierkegaard?" And he says, "Yes, I can't get enough of him." Stop! Kierkegaard can kill you. Because you know, he's depressed, and you know, it's like that singer, you know, I'm standing on a bridge on a cold and rainy night, and I thought you'd be here by now. There's nothing but the rain, no footsteps on the ground. Doesn't anyone want to find me? Doesn't anyone want to take me home? It's a cold, cruel life. Trying to figure out this life, right? Yeah, you know that. Yeah, and it's like, oh, so depressing. Thanks, you know. Man, you know, now I'm gonna just put the blanket over my head and sit there and sulk in the bedroom. Except for her, of course, because she's a millionaire. She's so popular, selling all these songs that are so depressing. A lot of depressing songs out there. I was listening to some German songs last night too. Depressing.
By whom?
Uh,
Oh Lord.
Anna, let's see. I saved it on Facebook so I could find it again. That's like an easy way. Take me back, right?
I don't have a lot of time to tell you. If you switch to Liberty Mutual, you could save $782. Yeah!
Sorry, no subtitles. So it's not as depressing as what's her face. Oh, and the French are depressing too. It's kind of a European. It's, you know, existentialism breeds kind of a sense of depression. So what's her name? It's all in your hands. Take me back. Nimmt means take. And you can speak German. All you have to do is speak English with a German accent, and you're good. This is sehr leicht to do. Very easy to do. Yes.
It's verboten.
Some words are hard, like Kartoffel instead of potato. Did that happen? But kindergarten, no problem.
Fish.
Fish.
And
Yeah. We could go through, you know, and yet our English vocabulary is supposed to be 80% French. The structure is supposed to be Germanic, Saxon. But the vocabulary, thanks to William the Conqueror, is 80% French.
Doesn't really make sense because the Normans they spoke French, but the local populace spoke Saxon.
Yeah. However, so let's take a quick look at Nietzsche, because I've only got like 5 minutes. But Nietzsche, by the way, there's a fantastic video on Nietzsche. Stephanie Flanders, and it's by the way. Maybe it's not me. Maybe it's not Stephanie. Maybe it's oh, you know who it is? It's the one who wrote the Hemlock Cut. I'm gonna have to go from the Hemlock Cut. Bettany. So Bettany Hughes. And I want Nietzsche.
1950, Nietzsche, age 13, quiet but prodigiously academic, won a scholarship here to one of the most prestigious boarding schools in Germany. A former Cistercian abbey, Pforte would be the place that nourished many of Nietzsche's philosophical interests.
Nietzsche believed that what he learned here formed
She's
him
pretty sexy.
both
That's
as
your
a
girl.
thinker and as a man.
It's okay to point that out,
Do
right?
we have any indication of what kind of a student he was?
Just
Whether he
being
was
honest.
good, whether he was happy here?
Yes, we know, because we have his school report here. You see here?
That is brilliant. I never thought I'd see Nietzsche's school report.
It is.
And there is Friedrich Wilhelm Nietzsche.
Absolutely. You see here the different topics he was taught in. First, you have the religion.
Yeah.
And this is interesting, because you would probably not expect Nietzsche to be a brilliant student in religion, but he obviously was, according to the report here. He was excellent. He not only knew a lot about philosophy,
He was a minister.
but he was
Lutheran.
also able to think and to write scholarly about these main doctrines of Christianity.
Well, I suppose in a way that follows. If you're going to criticise something intelligently, you have to understand it. You have to
Yes.
know what it is that you're tangling with.
Christianity is important, but on the other hand, the other pillar is the antiquity.
Latin and Greek, isn't it?
Yes,
Okay.
that's Latin and that's Greek.
Yeah.
And these two topics played an eminent role here, because this school here was really based on this classical tradition. And here,
40 years
Nietzsche's
old.
interest in the Greeks particularly grew.
I'm slightly worried by French, but there's only one line.
Yes, generally sufficient. Obviously, French was not his language, neither was Hebrew. There he lacks, obviously, knowledge in grammar.
Yes, okay. And maths?
Maths was horrible. There he was really bad. At the end, it was even questioned if he could pass the exam, because he was so bad in mathematics, and only because of the intervention of his teacher in Latin, he finally passed with all his excellent marks.
And what's the general ethos of the school here? Because if it's basing itself on classical teaching, that's a lot about competition and striving and absolutely doing the best you humanly can.
Yes, that's a good prescription, I think, because this school was really focused on excellence, was focused on building an elite. This was really life-shaping for Nietzsche, because afterwards he always was looking for the excellence. This idea that one could do out of his life what one wants to do out of his life became a very prominent idea.
Fascinating, and it's very...
So look her up. There's actually a long BBC show about Nietzsche that she hosts. She does a lot of these kinds of things for BBC, as well as writes books that are pretty good. Stephanie,
Eric Wayne, the world's weirdest Latinos.
how I get the stuff I do? What? I don't know where.
I mean, I'm pretty sure the recommendations for you, so
Yeah.
they like,
It's based off of your search history.
yeah.
Jim Gaffey.
Well, yeah, I would, yeah, no wonder, I watch a lot of Jim Gaffey. But this is Stephanie Flanders, and she does Marx, and that's excellent too. She also does other economists, and I've only got 2 minutes, and I gotta come up with a fit. Well, but I should say Nietzsche and Kierkegaard both, what makes them existentialists is they feel like, okay, so we're here, we're in the world, and it's up to us to give our lives meaning. So that's like the key ingredient of existentialism. You're existing, and now what, right? And so both of them feel like it's not like we're, society imposes roles on us. We're free agents. And so the depressing part of this is we're not necessarily attached to any of these stories. We're not attached necessarily to any society. It's up to us to decide to opt in. And so the depression part of it essentially is associated, I would argue, with this sense of enemy, as what was the name of the French sociologist that called it that? It began with a D. Can't think of it. The sense of aloneness, loneliness, right? So in a sense, you feel like like that topic. Where did loneliness come from? She was, by the way, yesterday arguing for Sunday rather, that it was because of all of our new Facebook and our iPhones and all the things that we're walking by people on our devices, and we're ignoring face to face, and loneliness is enhanced by our doing that rather than having friends and meeting people and talking with real people instead of texting, etc. Right? I think it's been a precursor to that. That device, those devices actually might help in some ways, because Fukuyama in his book The Great Disruption talks about that, and that was before we had all these devices, right? So that was the 90s or late 90s, I guess. And the problem he sees is that we're not joining anymore. We're becoming individuals, and our focus is on that self, and that I've got to make my own way. I'm not just kind of plugged into a social role automatically, but instead I have to choose. The typical student that goes to high school, and then people say, "What do you want to be?" And then, "I don't know." That never happened. Everyone knew what they were going to be, because their roles were already made for them. But we're living in a society where you've got to decide for yourself what you want to be. What would you like to do? Well, none of us automatically want to do anything, probably, right? It's instead you've got to choose. And now, wow, how do you choose? How do I? This sends me on a trajectory for my whole life. Do I sign up for English or French? Or any of these? Nothing seems like absolutely right. And add to it, of course, society is changing so fast. So by the time you sign up for English, you graduate, you go out to get a job, and you discover that AI has taken over all the jobs. There's no jobs for you. You should have signed up for encoding software. Talk about wanting to do that for a lifetime. My goodness. So, and an odd question, what do you think causes loneliness? How about that? It's okay?
Yeah.
What do you think causes loneliness? Does seem to be a new invention. The French, the Spanish, there's a book, 100 Years of Solitude, Soledad, right? That's kind of the Spanish version of, but that's solitude. And solitude can mean something very different than loneliness. In German, it's Einsamkeit. Oneselfness. Einsam.
Usually says einsam.
Just einsam. Wiedersehen, tschüss. See you Thursday.
I'm a lot less busy than I was.
Huh?
But I'm a lot less busy
Busy
now.
with the elections.
Well, now that, yeah, because it's almost over election season.